My name's Blake.
Do you want to go to war, Malaki? I'm for real. Ron.
Ron is here, everyone. Welcome back for more SPTV, where every day is a great day not to be in a cult. Guys, I was inspired to discuss the subject of today's video by some of the recent conversations I have had with Serge Del Mar. You can find Serge on YouTube. The name of his channel is Serge Del Mar, and his handle is at literally Serge. So in my chats with Serge, he has mentioned, he's used this phrase, and the last time he used this phrase in a chat that we were having, I asked him to explain what he meant by it. And the phrase was something like Scientology laundering felonies, laundering crimes. And I said, tell everyone what you mean by that. And it has to do with Scientology basically getting its members to confess to felonies so that Scientology can make money on the information. Now, this is one of these things, an example of a concept that the way Serge describes it has gotten me to think about certain things that happen in Scientology in a different way than I had ever thought about it previously. And this is just one of those examples. And so it was while thinking about this that I decided I wanted to do a video on a mandatory interrogation that all new Scientologists get. And it's called the A to J check. And I'm going to explain all this. Scientologists don't just get this interrogation once. And this isn't even the only type of interrogation that Scientologists get. There's dozens and dozens of different kinds of interrogations. And how Serge describes how Scientology monetizes the confession of crimes is actually even more egregious in the other types of interrogations than the one we're going to talk about today. But the one we're going to talk about today is easy to talk about because Jeffrey Augustine at the Scientology Money Project blog has done an article about this particular type of interrogation, and it's going to make our discussion of this very easy to do. So let's talk about real quick. What does A to J mean? There's a reference in Scientology called sources of trouble. And in this context, when L. Ron Hubbard said sources of trouble, he meant sources of trouble for the organization. So like if someone were to come in wanting to do some Scientology courses, they're like, we need to know if this guy is a potential trouble source, a potential source of trouble. Now, guys, for those of you who've been hearing former Scientologists tell their stories, this phrase, potential trouble source, or PTS, is a phrase that you'll hear all the time because it has to do with something else you'll hear mentioned all the time, an SP, or a suppressive person. Now, in Scientology, an SP is basically anyone that Scientology has kicked out. There's other ways of defining an SP, but essentially, if Scientology says you're not a Scientologist anymore, they do that by declaring you a suppressive person. You are an SP. Now, in Scientology, the most common definition of a PTS, or a potential trouble source, is someone who has a connection to an SP. But in Scientology, PTS actually means many more things. It just means, is this person potentially a source of trouble for the Scientology organization that they are participating in? Now, because Scientology is infatuated with finding out whether people are a source of trouble, every person who is starting a major Scientology course or auditing for the first time has to get what they call an A to J interview, an interview to find out if they fall into one of the 10 sources of trouble, type A through J. Now, guys, I grew up in a cult, but I can count A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. That is 10 different sources of trouble that L. Ron Hubbard broke down in its policy. And that's what this interview is about. So, okay. So this, let's just read the blog post. A to J, what Scientology wants to know before it approves you to receive services. Exactly. So you're going to go through this extensive interview to find out if you fall into any one of these 10 sources of trouble before you will be accepted onto a major Scientology course or auditing action. Now, in Scientology, there's two different types of services, roughly speaking. You can say introductory services or major services. The introductory services, might cost like $50, $75, $100. And those different courses and auditing actions can be finished in a couple days. I don't remember, to my recollection, you do not have to receive this interrogation in order to start an introductory service. But once you switch over from, you graduate from doing intro services to major services, you have to get this interview. It's not even, it's not optional. And a major service, to my recollection, is almost none of them cost less than $2,500, and none of them can be finished in less than 80 to 120 hours of full-time study. Okay, so let's go through this. The first set of questions seeks to determine if a potential Scientologist has anyone in their family, social circles, Facebook friends, etc., opposed to Scientology. So, guys, PTS Type A is generally in Scientology described as someone who is intimately connected to someone antagonistic to Scientology. And the following questions are part of the interrogation to determine whether you are in fact PTS Type A. As you can see, they don't just ask you the one question, they ask you many different versions of the question. So, and this interrogation is done on the e-meter, and you are required to answer completely. Refusing to answer a question or refusing to divulge a full answer will be grounds for refusing you participation in Scientology services. Okay, are you intimately connected to anyone who is antagonistic to mental or spiritual treatment or Scientology? 2, have any of your family or friends ever expressed any disagreement with Scientology or with you being a Scientologist? 3, is anyone evaluating for you or invalidating your wins? In this context, guys, evaluating means telling you what you should think about yourself. Is there, okay, 4, is there someone who doesn't want you to be here? 5, is anyone invalidating Scientology? 6, is anyone watching to see if you're making progress in Scientology? 7, are you here to prove to someone that Scientology works or to show them? 8, are you not telling someone that you are a Scientologist? Guys, if your answer to any of these questions is yes, Scientology considers that you are potentially a source of trouble to the organization. This is why people getting into Scientology, even in the early stages, even at the lower levels, are very quickly introduced to the concept that there are people in your life, even in your family, that you may want to disconnect from. And that is because the Scientology officials, it's usually the ethics officer, who is tasked with doing this interview, they want you to be approved to do your Scientology services. But you can't be approved to do those Scientology services as long as your answer is yes to any of these questions, or if you don't have a good handling for some of the things that cause you to answer yes to any of these questions. So even a simple question like, is there someone who doesn't want you to be here? If the answer to that question is yes, you've got to handle that, or you can't do your Scientology course. Have any of your family or friends ever expressed any disagreement with Scientology or with you being a Scientologist? If your answer to that question is yes, the ethics officer has to give you a handling to resolve this issue with your friends or family members, or else you can't do your Scientology service. And if that person who has expressed disagreement does not respond to the effort that you make to handle them on this disagreement, you have to disconnect from that person. Okay, so that's Type A. Type A PTS is, are you intimately connected to anyone antagonistic to Scientology? Okay, what is Type B PTS? Well, Type B PTS in Scientology is generally called being a criminal. Here are the questions that they ask you on the interrogation. Do you have a criminal record? One, do you have a criminal record? 2, have you committed any crimes for which you have not been caught? 3, are you currently doing anything bad? 4, do you have any debts to any persons antagonistic to Scientology? Imagine having to sit down and get this interrogation just to take a Scientology course. And yet, everyone who does do a major Scientology course has to sit down for this interrogation. Now, here is where we very quickly get into the concept of what Serge has described as laundering crimes. Guys, the question is, have you committed any crimes for which you have not been caught? What kind of organization wants to know this? And by the way, the answer isn't just yes or no. I mean, if the answer is yes, the ethics officer, again, is usually the person doing this interview, but anyone qualified to do the interview could be assigned to do the interview. The job of the person doing the interview is to get all of the details. It's not just to get a yes or no. It's to get all of the details down to the nitty gritty specifics, exactly the who, what, when, where, why, how, time, place, form, event, everything. What do you think Scientology does once they have that information? One of the things they do is figure out how can we make the most amount of money by fixing this guy or this gal for whatever it is that caused them to commit this crime. And wrapped up in this is is, are we going to let them continue to do Scientology, even though we have just got them to completely spill their guts to us about, to literally give us information that could be used to blackmail this individual? Now, even if Scientology determines that they're not going to let this person start their Scientology course or auditing right now, they put them on a program to handle it. Well, that program could involve, let's say the person has done, if I come up with any examples, I feel like I'm going to regret the examples that I use. But a crime for which they have not been caught. Scientology might go, okay, how can we get this person to make amends for the crime that they've not been caught for? We're not going to alert the authorities. No. Don't be confused about this. We're not going to alert the authorities, but we have to do something that will, we can say this person, even though they've not been caught, they've not been held accountable, they're not going to, we're not going to serve them up to the justice system. They will have made amends. Well, maybe we will have this person make a $50,000 donation to Criminon, Scientology's little criminal reform front group, or the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, Scientology's front group for trying to get psychiatrists thrown into prison, or maybe a hefty donation to the Way to Happiness will make up for the fact that this person has crimes for which they have not been caught. Maybe we'll do a little investigating into the state in which the crime was committed and find out what the statute of limitations are, or what the age of consent is, if you catch my drift. And then maybe we'll figure out that we should send this person to a different Scientology organization where they are not at risk of being imprisoned. And then we'll let them do Scientology services there so that we can make money off of this person in that jurisdiction. This is what Serge means when he talks about laundering crimes. Okay, so PTS Type B is criminal. All right, what is PTS Type C? Have you ever threatened to sue or embarrass or attack Scientology or Scientologists? I sort of forget how Scientologists, the short description for what Type C is. I guess it's just threatened to sue or embarrass Scientology. Okay, so this is, again, a short, just two little questions here. Have you ever threatened to sue or embarrass or attack Scientology or Scientologists? It seems silly, right? Because if you had done that, would you really be coming back to Scientology trying to do courses? Probably not. But the question too is interesting. Do you know of anyone who has? So this is another example where they're just as concerned with whether you're connected to anyone who has done this as they are concerned with whether you have done this yourself. If they determine that you are connected to someone who's done this, then they get to decide how they're going to use that connection. Do they want you to maybe spill the dirt? Like if you're connected to someone who has threatened to sue or embarrass Scientology, then the way you can atone or make amends for being connected to such an evil, degraded, suppressive person is maybe you can share some of the dirt on that person with Scientology that they can use to help destroy that person. And if you do that, then you will have proven to the organization that you are not, in fact, a source of trouble, and then they can accept you for services. Okay, let's move on to Type D. In Scientology, they sort of casually refer to this as a responsible for condition case. So here's the questions designed to detect if you are PTS Type D. Have you gotten worse or been harmed in any way because of being in Scientology? 2, do you feel that Scientology or Dianetics books or auditing or material are responsible for some condition you are in? 3, is anyone else the cause of the way you are now or some condition you are in? The only acceptable answer to any one of these questions is no. And if the answer is yes, you are a source of trouble to the organization, and they are not going to want to accept you for services. Okay, let's see. What is PTS Type E? Are you here on your own determinism? Yes, yeah, I remember this is casually referred to as other determined. Okay, anyway, E1. Are you here on your determinism? E2, do you feel obligated in any way do you feel obligated in any way or to anyone to be here? 3, have you been sent here? This question is always a little tricky, especially when Scientologists are trying to convince their kids to do Scientology. And when I say kids, I don't mean like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. I mean like teenagers, 16 years old, 17 years old. Oftentimes someone gets into Scientology and when their kids are teenagers, and their teenagers really have no interest. But in Scientology, these Scientologists are pressured to get their kids interested. And so, a kid will come in, a teenager will come in, and they'll have to do this interview, and they're just answering the question honestly. The question is, are you here on your own determinism? And the answer is usually, well, no, I'm here because my mom wanted me to, and I told her I would. And the ethics officer is like, uh-oh, that's not an acceptable answer. And then the ethics officer is in the unenviable position of having to explain to this teenager why that's not an acceptable answer. And to try to get the person to understand why it's not acceptable, and to sort of coach them and kind of ask them to answer in a different way so that they can pass the check. And of course, the second version of this question is, do you feel obligated in any way to anyone to be here? And the answer for any minor is going to be, well, yeah, I feel obligated to my mom or my dad because they're the ones who really want me to do this. I'm only doing it because they want me to. Teenagers don't have some like amazing, driving reason to want to do Scientology. They're doing it because their parents want them to. And yet that's not an acceptable answer. This is a kind of a really good example of how the brainwashing, and that's an inflammatory word, the cult conditioning, the training that someone else can tell you how to think and speak about things starts even at this introductory level, where all you're doing is being interviewed to determine whether they're going to accept you. And yet right from this introductory level, you start to be introduced to the idea that words mean something different than you think they mean. And you should answer questions differently than how you think they should be answered for the sake of being allowed to progress. Have you been sent here is just, that could be open to interpretation. Okay, let's look. What is PTS Type F? Are you here to see if Scientology works? Now, here again, this gets into an interesting territory, because a lot of people would very innocently and honestly say, well, yeah, I mean, I am here to see if Scientology works. I don't know if it works. You guys are telling me it works. You're telling me it's going to fix my this and fix my that and make me better at this and that. And I'm here to find out if that's true. What's wrong with that? And yet answering in the affirmative is the wrong answer. You're not allowed to answer in the affirmative. Okay. Okay, here we go. Yes, a hidden standard. So let's define hidden standard is in quotation marks here. Section F questions are trick questions. L. Ron Hubbard didn't want people who had what he called hidden standards participating in Scientology. Okay, L. Ron Hubbard defines in Scientology a hidden standard as some very specific thing that's wrong with you that you're going to use as a judge, as a benchmark for whether Scientology actually works. Okay. So whatever that might be, I don't know. Let's just bring up a stupid example. You have a particular nervous tick, and you're going to get some Scientology auditing. And in your mind, you're going to sit there and you're going, well, if my nervous tick goes away, then that means Scientology works. And if my nervous tick doesn't go away, then that means Scientology doesn't work. Okay, so why would that make you a potential trouble source? Because Scientology doesn't guarantee that any specific course or any specific auditing action is going to fix some specific thing. And if that's how you're approaching Scientology, then your expectations are not being properly managed. And therefore, when you do your course and you do your auditing and then you finish and that thing isn't fixed, you're going to be like, that didn't work for me. And you're going to ask for your money back. And that is potentially trouble to the organization. So Scientology wants to make sure that you're not there. You're there for general improvement. And if Scientology helps you a little bit in any part of your life, you're going to be perfectly happy with that. They don't want you to have standards too high or too narrow because that's not good for the organization. And they don't just come out and tell you that. Instead, they ask you these trick questions and then tell you basically how they want you to answer the question. Are you here to see if Scientology works? Guys, the answer to this question is supposed to be no. They actually want you to say no. I'm here for general improvement. I'm here because I want to just answer anything other than yes. Does Scientology always work for you? How are you supposed to answer this question if you've never done Scientology before? This is the weird cult conditioning, brainwashing. I always felt bad for people who had to do these interviews on new members because half of the interview is spent explaining to the person how you want them to answer the question. It's really ridiculous. Okay, let's go on to PTS Type G, which I got to tell you, I've never heard anyone in Scientology been declared PTS Type G, but this is an interesting one. Section G questions probe a person's attitude about wealthy and influential people. Okay, the two questions for Type G. Do you feel that special effort should be made to audit rich or influential people? Question 2, should Scientology bear the expense of auditing for potentially important personalities? Now, guys, this is one of those sections where people always answer the question wrong. Do you feel that special effort should be made to audit rich or influential people? Even as a Scientologist, my knee-jerk answer to these questions would be yes. Yes, I do feel that special effort should be made to audit rich or influential people, because if you do that, then they'll have wins with Scientology and they'll go out and tell the world or all their friends about how great it is. And then we'll get more rich and influential people into Scientology. And after all, isn't that what we always say we're trying to do? Don't we always run around like super happy whenever some big, rich, influential person or celebrity or powerful, figure gets into Scientology? Like, what kind of weird mind tricks are we playing here where we want people to answer no to this question? And yet, guys, the only acceptable answer to this question in this interview is no. Because in the policy that L. Ron Hubbard wrote about this, he explained how it creates trouble for the organization when people think the organization should audit people for free, should deliver free services to people because of who they are or who they know or how important they are, and that things like this have gotten Scientology into trouble in the past. And so that's why these questions are here. And yet, David Miscavige issued an order to the Flag Land Base in Clearwater, Florida, where I live, that Tom Cruise and his family members are to be given free services because of the fact that Tom Cruise is so influential. Tom Cruise and his family have been given hundreds of thousands of dollars of free Scientology services, specifically because he is so influential. And look, the second question here is, should Scientology bear the expense of auditing for potentially important personalities? If you say yes in this interview, the ethics officer has to explain to you why that's unacceptable and not the right answer. And he has to show you the various policies on it until you learn damn well that the only right answer is no. Just pay no mind to all the free services that Tom Cruise gets. The only right answer is no. Okay. The next thing, what is PTS Type H? Section H is a series of quick questions. Do you want to get better? Okay, now this isn't actually a trick question. The obvious answer is the right answer. You are supposed to say yes. Are you approaching Scientology with an open mind? Now, this is a trick question, and the key is, quote unquote, open mind. Guys, any normal person, when asked, are you approaching Scientology with an open mind, would say, oh, yes, I am. My mind is wide open. I am, I'm willing to learn. I'm here. I don't have any fixed ideas. I don't already have preconceived notions about what's going to happen to me or what I'm going to learn. My mind is a sponge. My mind and my thetan are nothing but pure sponge. And then the ethics officer has to regrettably explain to you how the only acceptable answer to this question is no. It is so silly. Okay, so as I sit here right now, I'm going totally blank on what the trick definition of open mind is in Scientology. Guys, Louis Repetto, I saw you in the live chat. Someone please remind me how Scientology defines open mind. Open mind is no specific desires for improvement. I'm almost positive my recollection is that's how Scientology defines an open mind. I have no specific desires for improvement. And somehow that's bad. Even though earlier, when they were asking you about your hidden standards, they wanted to make sure you didn't have any hidden standards. So it's almost like they want you to have open mind. Open mind is not, yeah, Louis Repetto says, open mind is not okay. Only keeping Scientology working is okay. So they want you to have some desire, some desirable things that you're hoping to achieve with Scientology. They just don't want you to feel that if you don't achieve that, that Scientology hasn't worked. But how are you supposed to know that this is exactly the frame of mind that Scientology wants you to be in order to accept you for services? You don't know. You don't know. Okay, so let's go back to the questions here. Oh, this is wild. Okay, so 1, do you want to get better? You're supposed to say yes. Of course, you're supposed to say yes. Are you approaching Scientology with an open mind? You're supposed to say no. And do you know of any other mental technology that works? Guys, let's take a bet in the live chat here. What do you think the right answer? If you think the answer to 3 is supposed to be yes, put a 1. If you think the answer to 3 is supposed to be no, put a 2. All right. Well, without waiting to see what you guys think, the only acceptable answer to question 3 is no. if you're like, but guys, if you don't already know how Scientology thinks about other mental practices, how are you supposed to know what the right answer is? So it's almost like this interview is pretty much an opportunity to indoctrinate you into what the acceptable method of thinking about things is in Scientology. And it's almost like a litmus test. It's almost like if you can make it through this interview and cooperate and agree to give the right answers once the right answers have been explained to you, then you are of the right mindset to be allowed to participate in Scientology. So like if you're in this interview and you're like, but I know some people who've been helped by speaking with a therapist, a psychiatrist, a psychologist. I know some people who've been helped by medication. I know some people who've been helped by EST or Landmark or meditation or whatever. You're potentially a trouble source to the organization. And the poor ethics officer has to sit there and show you L. Ron Hubbard's reference about this and L. Ron Hubbard's reference about that and the definition of this and the definition of that. And after a while, the reason my attention is on Louis Repetto in the chat is because he was an ethics officer in Scientology, and I guarantee you, Louis, I can't remember if you were a public ethics officer or just a staff ethics officer, but I feel like you've probably done dozens of these interviews, and it would be interesting to hear your experience of having to coach people to the point where they understand that there are only certain acceptable answers to these questions, and you don't make it through the interview until you learn that lesson and answer the questions accordingly. Okay, so you are PTS Type H if you do not want to get better or do not believe that people can get better or are approaching Scientology with an open mind or believe that there are actually other mental technologies that work. Okay, what is PTS Type I? Oh, this actually is a little redundant. Actually, to me, I've always felt this was very redundant with Type H, but potential trouble source Type I. How do we figure out in Scientology if you are a potential trouble source Type I? Well, we ask you these questions. Do you believe that anyone can get better? The only obvious answer is that is acceptable is yes. What gains are you expecting in Scientology? Again, it's weird. On the one hand, they don't want you to have specific things that you're expecting Scientology to handle. On the other hand, they do want you to be able to say what you want to get out of Scientology. It's a bit of a mindfuck, honestly. And also, Scientology has this thing where they say Scientology is a technology that works 100% of the time when applied 100% standardly. And you go, unless you don't think it, unless you don't want it to work, unless you don't think that people can get better, Unless you have very specific hopes and desires about what you want to achieve with auditing, then you're a little dicey. We may not want to deal with you. You might be a lot of trouble to us. Like if a Scientologist really were to think about this just a little deeply, they would go, guys, it's set up in this circular, unfalsifiable logic where Scientology can never be wrong. But at the same time, we're only willing to accept people who really, really, really want to get better. So if you're like, look, I'm not sure about this. I don't actually think that people can get better. I think that, you're born a particular way and your DNA, nature, I believe in nature, not, nature is responsible for 90% of your personality. Nurture is maybe responsible for 10% of your personality. I'm not sure Scientology can really fix anybody, but my friend said that it did. And he said, gosh darn it, Scientology is not a faith. It is an applied religious philosophy. And he said, you don't have to believe in Scientology. You just have to do it. And Scientology works on you no matter what. And you should go in there and try it. And so that's why I'm here. I'm here to see if Scientology works, but I don't think people can improve, but I'm willing to be proven wrong. They're going to be like, yeah, buddy, that's not going to work for us. Yeah. We don't really want to roll the dice on you. Because if you don't want it to work, then it's probably not going to work. Because then if you don't want it to work, how do we know you're going to cooperate with the auditor? And then if it doesn't work on you, you're going to want your money back. And we are all about the money. We are about that Benjamins. We're about that life. And so we don't know if we're not going to accept you. And you're like, okay, fine. What's the right answer to this question? And you're like, okay, fine. Sure. I do believe people can get better. Okay, fine. Is that the right answer? And then they're like, yeah, that's the right answer. Okay, let's move on. Okay. And then the final one is J. Where's J? PTS Type J. Oh yeah, that's someone sent in to basically infiltrate and investigate Scientology. This is basically members of the press. So how do we determine if someone in Scientology is PTS Type J? Well, we ask you these questions. Do you represent an attempt to investigate Scientology? Do you know of anyone who is investigating Scientology? Are you here to make any judgment about Scientology? Have you ever gone to court about Dianetics and Scientology? Have you ever had thoughts of suing or requesting a refund if the tech, quote unquote, didn't work? Okay, well, guys, if your answer to any one of these questions is yes, you are PTS Type J, and you will not be accepted for Scientology services. Let's see. I like this one. Have you ever had thoughts of suing or requesting a refund if the tech didn't work? One of the reasons I find that so funny is that part of the Scientology enrollment forms that you sign and part of the paperwork, part of the things that Scientology had to swear to when they were getting their tax exemption back and leading up to 1993 is they had to promise the IRS that they actually do give refunds, and would give refunds to anybody that requested it. And yet they literally consider you a source of trouble if you've ever even had a thought of asking for a refund. Do you represent an attempt to investigate Scientology? By the way, this category is why people in the media industry, journalists, reporters, Greta Van Susteren, for some reason, is like the only exception to this rule that I've ever known of, are not accepted for auditing in Scientology. Because they say, if you are a journalist, if you are a reporter, no matter what you say, no matter what you admit to, you represent an effort to investigate Scientology. And for that reason, you represent a potential trouble. You are potentially a source of trouble to the organization. Now, you would think that if Scientology really believed that its technology worked 100% of the time when applied 100% standardly, it would actively seek out people in the media. And it would give them free auditing to just show them how powerful Scientology really is, and that those people would in turn spread the good word about Scientology and bring others in. But Scientology actually works the exact opposite way. They don't want to reach out to people who are in those industries because they see them as a potential threat to the organization. How many people still were not aware that Greta Van Susteren is one of the highest level, just as high level of a Scientologist as Tom Cruise, just as high level of a Scientologist as Grant Cardone? Greta Van Susteren is right up there. Have you ever heard Greta Van Susteren publicly discuss Scientology? Nope. There's a lot of people who think Greta Van Susteren is Christian. She is not a Christian. She is an OT8 Scientologist, as is her husband. For some reason, Scientology doesn't consider her PTS Type J. Okay, let's see. What else? There are additional questions to the A to J check interview. Have you ever threatened or attempted suicide? Have you ever seriously considered suicide? Do you have any sort of security clearance? If so, get full specifics. Are you are you or any member of your family a member or ex-member of the media, government, police, spy organizations such as the NSA, CIA, IRS, DOJ, FBI, or any federal agency in any country? And if your answer to this question is yes, they get all of the juicy details from you. Do you have any history of psychiatric or psychological treatment? Have you taken psychiatric drugs? If so, what, when, how much, and for how long? Have you had any shock treatment or so-called psychiatric brain operations? Are you terminally ill? Do you have any history of cancer? Do you have any body conditions, situations, or illnesses? And are you on any type of medication? Get all details and pull any strings. Have you ever been denied processing, which means auditing? Have you ever been denied auditing by HCO? HCO is basically Scientology's HR division, the Office of Special Affairs, or the Office of the Senior CS-int for any reason. We don't have to get into those definitions. Have you ever had a psychotic break, a loss of touch with reality? Have you ever experienced heavy overstimulation or overstimulation? Do you have difficulty sleeping? What is the state of your compliance to the US or other countries' tax codes? Do you have a way of avoiding taxes that would be considered illegal? Oh my God, I love that one. So you're trying to take a Scientology course, and what they want to do is give you an interrogation and ask you whether you have are involved in any illegal tax avoidance schemes. And if yes, please tell us all about it. Can any of you think of a sensible reason why a so-called church wants to interrogate you about your tax avoidance schemes? Is it possibly because they're just looking for tips? Okay. Oh my goodness. Do you have any legal obligations that you are in non-compliance with, such as child support, etc.? Get full data. Guys, when you hear Serge talking about interrogations and laundering crimes, just consider that all of the questions we just went over, those are the questions every potential new Scientologist are asked in the very, very beginning before you're ever even allowed through the door of the course room where they deliver major Scientology courses. Not the introductory ones, but the major ones. That's the intro level interrogations. The mid-level and upper level interrogations are so much more invasive, are so much more egregious, are so much more blatant in asking you to confess to felonies for which you could be imprisoned, and felonies for which, once you divulge that information, Scientology then figures out how they can use that information to make as much money off of you as possible. That is what Serge means when he says laundering crimes. And I guarantee you, any Scientologist or under the radar Scientologist listening to this has never thought about it in that way. But think about it. That is exactly what it is. They want to know how to make as much money as possible off of the crimes that you're divulging. But the discreditable information that you are offering up. They really just want to make as much money off of you as possible. Okay, let's see. Planet Lupa says, question, is this question list, the interrogation, also filmed when you answer it? And are you informed about that? It is actually filmed. You've heard us on my channel and other channels, people talking about this new evolution that David Miscavige implemented about 20 years ago of buying and renovating these massive new buildings for the existing Scientology orgs. These new buildings are called ideal org buildings. All these ideal org buildings have built-in recording systems, automatic recording systems in all of the ethics offices and all of the interview spaces and all of the auditing rooms. All of these things automatically get recorded to hard drives. So no longer, back in the old days, you might have like a camera off to the side, but everything built-in hidden cameras, built-in, all these interviews are automatically recorded to computer hard drives. And I sort of assume that people know that is the case, but I was never really a public Scientologist. I don't actually know if people who are getting this interview for the first time are aware that it's being recorded. And the more I think about it just sitting here, I'm not sure how they would know. I'm not sure how they would know. It might be buried in the fine print of some of the forms that they sign, but it's not like it's overtly explained to the person, okay, we're about to do an interview and I just want to make sure you know that this is being recorded. So it's quite possible that most people don't know. After someone's been a Scientologist for a long time and they understand how auditor training works and how sessions are recorded, I assume that eventually they just know everything's being recorded. But in the early stages, I guess it's quite possible that they're not aware of it. Okay, let me see. Okay, HM says, I read that in a cult, one's personality can change to conform to the group. Have you noticed that your personality has changed since leaving? So this is interesting. I very much agree with the first part of the statement. It does feel that most Scientologists are sort of gradually over time evolving to have a uniform personality. I guess what I'm struggling with is that on the one hand, I agree to the first statement. And on the other hand, I'm not sure that I have a great answer to the second half of the question. Have you noticed that your personality has changed? I guess I want to differentiate here between personality and conduct, because I believe one's basic personality probably stays the same, but it's how you express that personality or how you conduct yourself around others in Scientology or in other cults that tends to become more and more uniform. And so that when you leave Scientology, and I'll speak for myself, when I leave Scientology, I don't know that it's my basic personality that is changing, but it's just how you self-monitor or self-censor, or you just stop behaving in a way that is geared towards or aimed towards pleasing everyone around you. And the best way to please everyone around you is for everyone to behave in the same in the manner that everyone has agreed is most pleasing. And so, and I think I've said, one of the things I've said when I've talked about the evolution of my YouTube channel is that for like the first 5 or 6 years that I even had my channel, I very specifically, even though I qualified for monetization on YouTube, I didn't want to turn monetization on. Like I didn't want to click the button that allowed YouTube to put ads on my videos. Because in my mind, I was like, oh no, if I do that, Scientologists will criticize me. They'll say I'm only doing the videos for money. And I was still very wrapped up in being concerned about what a Scientologist would think about me. And it took me a long time to realize, wait a second, if you still care so much about what Scientologists would think about you, aren't you still letting that organization and that group and their ideas control you? And I had to go, yeah, I guess I am, and I had to let go of that. Like, why do I care whether a Scientologist would say I'm doing my videos for money? That doesn't make sense. So then I turned on monetization. But that's an example of, it's not that my personality changed. It's that I chose to let go of the idea that I actually would care about what a Scientologist thought about what I was doing or what they would be able to say to each other about it. So anyway, that's my answer. Thank you for that, HM. Marty Kingshot. What would Scientology do if you plead the fifth? They would laugh in your face. There's no such thing as pleading the fifth in Scientology. They would plead the fifth. If you plead the fifth, they would simply declare you PTS, and they would decide which one of these PTS types A to J you were, declare you that, and just rule you ineligible for services. Yeah, there's no such thing as pleading the fifth. Pleading the fifth, that's for silly wogs. Rights are for wogs. Scientology has its own justice system. Okay, guys, Jesus Christ, 45 minutes. I didn't mean this video to be that long. Anyway, I've got more I'm trying to do between today and 8:30. Ooh, Nerd Report. Hey, Nerd Report. Hello, Aaron. I would love to interview you on Nerd Report next week. What is the best way to contact you? Nerd Report. Email me at growingupinscientology@gmail.com and we'll set it up. Let's definitely do it next week. All right, guys. Thank you for hanging out with me. Stay tuned for much more this afternoon. Thank you, as always, to everyone who watches until the very end, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe right here.